So, Greg, it just seems like yesterday that you and I had hair, and that we were walking the quad of McAllister trying to figure out what life was to be all about. It just seems like yesterday.
It was 18,250 days.
That's a long yesterday, Greg. Well, those were the days of the Vietnam War where we weren't sure who we were fighting and why we were fighting. And I don't know if you remember, but I was pretty adamant against that war and had plans to go to Canada because of my objections.
Today we have Iraq, Afghanistan, and ISIL, and we don't always know who we are engaging against.
And those McAllister days were days of incredible racial tension. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his great speech and leadership, and that was the infamous Freedom March on Washington. And as you remember, McAllister was very much involved in serving in justice and peace.
And sadly, sorry, go ahead.
No?
And sadly, these are days of Ferguson and New York City, when it seems that things have not changed.
Yeah, but some things have changed, and that's maybe the place of our beloved mainline churches.
We talked about this yesterday, on by denomination.
Yes.
So, Methoditarian.
He's a Methoditarian. I forgot that you are a bi-denominational. Yes, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, the Disciples of Christ, the UCC, those who are considered the mainline, we were the leaders of community life back in the 60s. It was the place where people would go not only to connect in meaningful ways with God, but it was the place in the community where friendships were established. The church partnered with local governments to address common community issues. The church was a primary place where children and youth learned values and how to socialize and how to grow into young adults. Sunday was the church first. But today, Greg, sadly, I think the church and faith is a menu du jour option. The park district, the elite sports teams, the recreational activities, the Sunday as sleep-in day has made Sunday just one of the many choices of what people can do on a Sunday. Oh, I love sports, and I personally am frustrated that what parents will do entirely crazy things to see that their son or daughter won't miss a Sunday sports game. In fact, if you look out here, you'll see a lot of families missing because that's what they're doing right now, thinking that it will teach their son or daughter something important, yet a youth event at church has now become a totally optional thing. Though these gatherings can teach us things for life, I sometimes wonder if it's more the parents than the kids that are driving some of these choices. It's just frustrating to see who's not wanting to be a part of a faith community today. I think that has changed.
I did ask Steve's permission to do this. Can I stand up for that?
Do whatever you want.
I think better when I'm older. I visit a lot of churches. As a retired pastor, I go to many different churches, often as a guest to do a supply. So churches are right now, it is confusing for churches. It is disturbing for churches to see the kinds of shifts that Steve has described. For some people, and you can tell, you can just tell that this isn't a put down. For some people, it's just plain discouraging to see the shifts that have happened in our culture. That's why it's so wonderful. I walked in here yesterday and you can instantly sense the energy and the health. I mean, you can feel it when you come into this church. So it is frustrating and it is discouraging for some people, but it's also extremely exciting to be part of the church now. I remember still one of my heroes, and Diana grew Harry Emerson Fosdick was for years pastor at Riverside Church in New York, and he was the greatest preacher in the 20th century. Unbelievable. And in 1941 or 1942, I mean, think of what was going on in the world. He wrote a book called "It's a Great Time to Be Alive." 1941, 1942 was a ghastly time to be alive. As he acknowledged, he was not into illusion. He acknowledged that. He said, yes, it's a ghastly time to be alive, but it's a great time to be alive. Steve and I talked about the fact yesterday that it's a great time to be in ministry in the church right now. I can't remember if this is something in the lectionary. I don't really follow the lectionary, but there's this great line from the book of Ezekiel, 24th chapter, the 18th verse. So I preached to the people in the morning. Is this familiar? So I preached to the people in the morning. In the evening, my wife died. And then the following day, I did as God commanded. Preached to the people. His wife dies. He gets up and keeps going. And generally speaking, historians and scholars say that Ezekiel represents the high water mark, the high water point of Israelite religion, Israelite faith, Israelite literature. In other words, out of this awful circumstance, he's in the exile. He's 2,000 miles from home. All this horrible stuff is happening to him. Still gets up and keeps going. And I find that incredible. And I'm hoping, frankly, that the first half of Ezekiel is pretty grim, but the second half is just loaded with that kind of promise. That it is a confusing time, a disturbing time, even a discouraging time for people, but it's a great time to be alive.
The reality is that the church has always gone through times of dry bones, when it's just been a skeleton and it's needed to come to life. It's the rhythm that God has placed into life, which moves from ordinary time to grace-filled time to extraordinary grace-filled time. And so it's, I think, a privilege for us to think about being a part of a church that is going through transitions, but still being people that believe that new flesh, new life can begin to come onto bones that were dead and were dried. And so it's appropriate for us to move into a time of confession, because there are times when our bones are dry. There's times when our well of life is running shallow. And there's times when the cup that we want to pour out to others is either too full or too empty. And so I invite you to just take a moment and consider the ways that we can be people of faith to those who are around us and to the world in which we live. And to do that, I think we need to empty our cup. It may be too full of anxieties or worries or selfish concerns or angers or who knows what. And so I'd like to invite you into a time of sharing and confessing with God, a time to empty your cup so that we can fill it